Hello again. Thank you very much for staying with us. The divided Security Council continues to meet on the unfolding situation in Venezuela, with calls from the United States for the international community to recognize the new democratic government led by the self-proclaimed President Juan Guaido. This as a momentum grew for political dialogue in the country, with countries from the European Union declaring that they too would recognize the new president if incumbent President Nicolas Maduro did not call for fresh elections within 8 days. South Africa also expressed concern at what it called attempts to circumvent the country's constitutional legal mechanism, while Russia accused the US of attempting a regime change. Sherwin Bryce-Pease attended the UN Security Council meeting. Sherwin, a very good evening to you. This meeting, of course, called by the United States because they're seeking international support to recognize Venezuela's opposition leader. Let's start with what happened in the council.
Well, that attempt, Griselda, as you rightly point out, failed spectacularly. Initially, the United States and some of their allies, particularly the Europeans in the Council, attempted to introduce what we call a presidential statement. Now, the Security Council has three ways of communicating its decisions, either through a press statement, which is the lowest form, through a presidential statement, which requires the consensus of all Council members, or through a resolution when you vote and can impose a veto or not if you're a permanent five-member. In this instance, they introduced a presidential statement. I just want to read you the last paragraph. The Security Council calls for the immediate start of a political process in Venezuela that leads to free, fair and credible elections with international electoral observation in the shortest possible time. The Security Council remains prepared to support the restoration of democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela. Of course, Council could not agree on that presidential statement. They put it into what you call a period of silence. If you break silence, which the Russians and Chinese did before 8 a.m. Eastern time this morning, that presidential statement was then put aside. Then what the Russians tried to do, Griselda, was to introduce a procedural vote to basically make the argument that Venezuela is not historically on the Council agenda, that this is an internal affair that should be handled by domestic political parties and the citizenry of Venezuela, that the Security Council only deals with issues that pertain to the to international peace and security. They put this question to a procedural vote, in effect, to try and block the United States from proceeding with the meeting at all. And South Africa, Russia, China and Equatorial Guinea voted along with Russia, but unfortunately they were in the minority, 9 countries voting in favor of the meeting to proceed. Essentially, the Europeans coalescing around the United States with their South American allies, and so the meeting proceeded. And that gives the, everyone then the opportunity to say their say. The United States made the argument, basically calling, I'll read you a little bit of what Mike Pompeo said, Griselda. The time is now to support the Venezuelan people, recognize the new democratic government led by interim President Guaido, and end this nightmare. No excuses. So, what we've heard from this America First policy under the Trump administration is you're either with us or against us. I think we heard that from George W. Bush when they invaded Iraq. And so you hear this similar sentiment. Of course, many in the Council, including South Africa, were not with the United States. Ambassador Jerry Machila basically talking about the founding principles.
Yeah, sorry about that, Sherwin. I wanted to talk about that. If we look at the statements that were made, or the remarks that were made by Mike Pompeo, referring to basically what he claims is a deteriorating or a grim state of Venezuela under the current president, and of course talk to us a bit about South Africa's position, which was articulated by Ambassador Machila just over 2 hours ago, basically in a nutshell, rejecting this as a ploy to undermine democratic processes in Venezuela, according to him.
Pompeo didn't just talk about the internal politics. He also called out states like Russia, China and Iran, basically accusing them of trying to prop up the Maduro regime, as they call it. He also said it was not a surprise that those who rule without democracy in their own countries, Griselda, are trying to prop up a country that is in dire straits. And of course, the fourth speaker after Pompeo was South Africa, which is very much a democracy, a constitutional one at that. And Jerry Machila basically basically making the case that South Africa bases its decisions on the principle of its constitutional democracy, which they hold very dear, that the respect for the rule of law is very, very central to how South Africa conducts itself on the international arena, and that the grievances that many Venezuelans might very well have in terms of the electoral process, the political process in that country, should be handled by the constitutional mechanisms that are available to them in Venezuela. He went on, Ambassador Machila, to call on all parties to participate in a national dialogue to ensure unity and reconciliation. And what we are also critically hearing, Griselda, from the European Union states, Germany, France, Spain, some of the big European states, they are now saying that if Maduro does not call for a new election within 8 days, they have this I don't know how they came up with the 8-day deadline, but the Europeans are saying if Maduro does not call for fresh elections within 8 days, they will then move on and recognize Juan Guaido as the interim president of this country. So this is a fluid situation. Venezuela's foreign minister is also here. He just spoke a short time ago, and he basically accused the United States of trying to create instability in their country and calling it, of course, a coup d'etat, and, of course, backed by Russia that says this is about regime change.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease live from New York. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this after the United States used an open meeting of the UN Security Council to urge member countries to recognize the Venezuelan opposition leader as the interim president of that country.